This is Remote Ruby.
Have you any remote idea to the meaning of the word?
Welcome back, me. Oh, thank
Welcome back, you.
I was so sad last week, but gotta do work, gotta pay bills.
Chris and I had an interesting conversation, so
it was another good therapy session.
yeah.
Should just stop this podcast and start another one.
Just
It's just about
life.
yes, exactly. Well, I hate that I missed it, but I'm glad to be back, and I'm glad the show went on without me. Anything good before we get started?
Oh, I don't know. It's been a fun week of exploring. I've been using Jumpstart in rebuilding Hatchbox and discovering all these little tiny things that I missed that were like, oh yeah, like the OmniAuth callbacks for OAuth. I inherit from a Jumpstart controller to give it a bunch of default functionality, but that controller's an isolated namespace engine, so it can't redirect it doesn't redirect to the correct routes because it's in the engine instead. And I was like, oh yeah, this has been broken for like over a year and I should have fixed that a long time ago, but I just never noticed it. So it's fun to go through projects and like clean up those edge cases that you're like, oh yeah, we should have fixed that a long time ago. Feels rewarding.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool to rebuild one of your projects with another project that you built.
Yeah, it's kind of fun. It's a good battle testing it, it's been fun. It's been using, I think you guys use Caddy for some stuff at Podia, and we're going to be using Caddy probably to make SSL is just one of the pain in the butts of, hosting yourself with Let's Encrypt doesn't really have their certbot library it's okay at best. It's a little bit of a struggle to use. But Caddy's web server builds in all the Let's Encrypt issuing. And so we're going to probably use that, and the built-in API of the new version allows us to tweak configs and everything really easy. And it seems to have a really nice load balancer that you would have to pay for with Nginx and stuff. So it feels like it's going to be a great improvement. And then switching to ASDF instead of RBM to manage node versions and other Python and PHP or whatever we might want to support in the future. So it's going to be amazing.
Very welcome from me.
Yeah. And we have a lot of people that want to deploy WordPress and Rails or Laravel and Rails and several things in the same server. So it'll be a nice improvement, but oh my gosh, it's a reminder of just how much there's just so much to build to make it all work. And make it work reliably is the hard part, actually. Making it work in the easy, case is not so bad. But when you spin up a cluster and you want to add a load balancer and a web server and move cron to a different server and whatever, things get in the weeds real fast. And so I've been having fun trying to figure out how we're going to handle that. But I don't think we're going to be able to very easily refactor the existing app. Which is why I was we're going to just build it from scratch and just get rid of all the legacy stuff and not have to worry about it. We'll still support that. It's stable in the new version. I just don't want to convert everybody's existing stuff from Nginx to Caddy and RVM to ASDF and so on. So it's been a fun week. Andrew, anything new with you?
I've been on PTO all week, which is what I said in the last episode. And I've been surfing and chilling. Vegging out.
That's great.
And buying crap. And I think the best part is I told Chris that the thing I was going to do was clean up all my messes. And then I made bigger messes.
I was going to say, that doesn't look very clean.
No, it's not. I did some workspace upgrades and I haven't really finished the upgrade, mid-upgrade. So, but no, it's been a nice chill week that I needed.
That's cool. Good. You're in the middle of refactoring.
Yes.
It's not cleaned yet. You're in the middle of it.
Yeah. Like Chris, I am refactoring, just not code.
Yeah, Jason, you'll have to make sure, you have to tell your kids to refactor their room, not clean their room.
Well, I think my kids already hate me. They're just going to hate me even more if I start using terms like that. Especially if they become software developers. That's cool. Sounds like good things going on both directions. I got a call from a number I didn't know, and I answered it, and it was someone who had just signed up for HopeGrid. And I guess I got my number off the Stripe receipt, and they had questions and like a lot of feedback for me. And so they actually had another like church they were working with who's also using it. And like I got on the call with both of them, and they're like, here's all the things we want. And I was like, that's actually genius. Like Shannon and the boys are out of town this week. So like I stayed up to like 3 a.m. 2 nights in a row, just coding on HopeGrid. It was just fun. I felt like I had a reason to work on something. And, you know, I still hate a lot of the decisions I made in it, like using Bootstrap and other stuff. And it feels like it slows me down, but I don't know. It was just nice. It was nice to like code with a purpose.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Those are the most like fun things to work on where you're like, I know this person needs it. And especially when you like are working on a new project where you're trying to get early customers and stuff. When someone asks for something, you're like, yeah, I can deliver on that, and then impress them. And maybe they'll tell friends and whatever. That's good.
That was the thing that like really energized me. So it's like, I'm going to get a lot of people in our area using this, but I need this in order to do that. And I was like, you got it. I don't know. It's just cool.
You're just making dreams come true.
Yeah. Like the last year, like the last 6 months, especially like once COVID hit, I was like, this isn't going anywhere. Like I need to put my energy somewhere else. So I don't know. It seems like the last couple of weeks, there's been a lot more movement. Anyway, that's what's up with me. But today we have a guest. Andrew, do you mind introducing our guest?
Sure. So our guest today is Jonas, and he works on Matestack. This episode was actually requested from one of our listeners. So shout out, listener. I took a look at Matestack, and I think it's really cool because it's basically something that I've been kind of like dreaming about and kind of working toward building myself. And if you've been listening to this podcast at all, you'll know that I built like a helper framework that is very similar to what Matestack is kind of looking, but not as well implemented. And that kind of fell on its face in some areas. But Jonas, do you want to give a little introduction, tell the folks who you are, why you're famous, and start giving us a little introduction to Matestack?
Yes, thank you. Well, I'm Jonas, and I'm sitting in Germany right now. It's 8 p.m. I'm pretty excited to be here. Well, I don't know where to start, actually. It's doing software engineering since 7 years and worked on various programming languages and projects, and did like PHP, Rails, .NET and stuff. And then after a few years, I took a break, and I was actually traveling through Australia, and I wanted to start a new project. And I started to build everything from scratch again. And I thought that should be easy, especially like when it comes to the view layer, like implementing reactive UIs with a JavaScript application and Rails on the backend. And I didn't want to do that anymore. It was like, no, it should be easier. And that's where I started to think about something like pre-built components, something like that. So I dreamed about like plugging components together and everything should work. And I actually had the crazy idea, like I'm using Docker Compose a lot, this YAML configuration. And I thought like, why isn't it possible to configure your UI like that? Just go with the YAML file and structure your things and say this should behave like that, and just configure how your user interface should work, especially for quick prototyping, something like that. And I've implemented that as well, actually, and it worked. It wasn't pretty flexible. It was, of course, limited. I gave a talk in Munich about this YAML thing. And then somebody of the audience told me, like, well, why don't you use a Ruby DSL? It would be pretty much as easy to use or whatever, but it would be way more flexible. And I thought, yeah, that's a good idea. And yeah, that was how Matestack was born, actually, because that's what it is. It's a Ruby DSL enabling you to plug pre-built components together. Actually, it feels different sometimes, but it is like Matestack offers pre-built components, UI components, and you just plug them in using a Ruby DSL, and you code Ruby, but at the end, it's going to be an UI, and it's going to be a reactive UI if you want to as well, without touching JavaScript. So that's a quick walkthrough. Maybe you have more specific questions, but I just wanted to make it pretty quick.
Yeah. So I love the fact that on your homepage, you have kind of some information about it and you have some examples. So we'll push some people to check those out. But the one thing that stands out to me is Matestack enables you to craft maintainable web UIs in pure Ruby, skipping ERB and HTML. And I have been railing about how much I dislike ERB and ultimately HTML for too long. And I love that.
Too long indeed.
Yes, too long indeed. Both of them are sick of hearing me talk about it. And then I saw Matestack. I was like, this is exactly what my dreams were, but more refined and prettier and better. So let's start from like the basics. Like, how is Matestack different from something like Vue component or Trailblazer cells or something like a traditional kind of component type gem or something?
Yeah, well, like you don't have to use any HTML or ERB at all. So Matestack, actually, the current version is built on Trailblazer cell because we're using a lot of Trailblazer cells, like, for example, our div component. So you just use a div or you write pure Ruby and you call the div component just using the DSL method div. And in the background, that's a Trailblazer cell. And we've implemented a HAML component for that. And so at the end, we implemented all the HTML-like things, but we have an abstraction layer on top of it, or at least some kind of layer on top of it, enabling Matestack users not to touch ERB or HTML or something like that at all, just to write really pure Ruby. And the funny thing is that it wasn't meant to be like that at the beginning, as I told you. But like I tried it out and it worked somehow. And I realized how much fun it is to write pure Ruby and then to write that in a Ruby class. And then you use Ruby's language features to structure your implementation. So you start coding Ruby instead of writing ERB code, actually. So that was not really their purpose, but I realized it while trying out. And I thought for me, it was like huge fun. And so I kept on going and we've built production apps already with that. So yeah, it worked out and we're pretty proud.
Yeah, y'all have built something really cool. So this is a podcast. It's hard to kind of describe code. I mean, we try to do it, but it's hard to do it. But I wonder if we could kind of talk about, you're saying this is a Ruby DSL. Can you try to talk through what it actually looks like? Because if you go into our show notes, you'll be able to click a link to your site and everyone can see this. But for the people who are driving or can't get to their computer right now, can you kind of talk us through what these actually look like, these kind of component UIs written in Ruby?
Yeah, I'm going to try my best to do that. Yeah, so the basic element of Matestack is that you create a Ruby class on your application. And this Ruby class inherits from a Matestack base class. And within this class, you have an instance method called response. Within this method, you start calling Matestack's core components just using Ruby methods like div. That's just a Ruby method call. And this is mapped to a Matestack core class at the end. But you don't have to think about it. You just call this Ruby method div, and you can pass in a hash, which could be with an attribute like class, defining the class of this div. And one really important thing is that you then pass in a block. So because HTML or UI, web UIs are structured hierarchically, and so you need to, you use this, you nest blocks, Ruby blocks into each other to kind of replicate that structure, but you can break out of this nesting while using other Ruby instance classes of your custom component you build on your project. Really hard to describe.
Yeah, I know.
But I hope you get a feeling. It doesn't sound that good, in my opinion, if you talk about it. But if you have a look at it, you clearly see, if you just use the core components, you clearly see that it's mapped to HTML tags. So it kind of feels familiar. But on the other hand, you see that's pure Ruby, and you see how you can utilize Ruby functionalities to clean up your implementation there. And so it's probably for people who didn't see Matestack until now, it's pretty new. But yeah, so just have a look at matestack.io. It's probably the best idea to get to know how Matestack's looking like.
One of the examples you have on the homepage here is a component with some JavaScript, which is kind of neat because you have it where, you have this on-click wrapper around a button. So then you can define the callback there, the event that it triggers, and then the callback for that event also in Ruby, which is kind of neat. So is that something that you have where it will generate the response in there? So this example is clicking a button that displays some text that says you clicked on me. So Matestack comes with some JavaScript to connect that up. And then are those responses rendered in the JavaScript, or is it actually making an AJAX request to render that?
So it's important to differentiate a little bit. And so we have kind of 3 layers of Matestack. The first one, what I just described, was just pure static UIs, so without any reactivity. So at the end, just to build HTML UIs, like using div, span, button, whatever, just the static components. And this is going to be rendered to HTML. So you define this Ruby class, and Matestack renders that to HTML and ships that to the browser. So that's the first level of Matestack. But we have reactive UI components as well. So you can use them optionally. And on click, what you just said is it's pretty much the simplest reactive UI component of Matestack. And reactive UI components are working in a way that you have Ruby class where the template of the Vue.js component is defined, and then you have a pure Vue.js JavaScript component. So onClick is a core component. So within the core, you have 2 files. So it's an onClick Ruby component and the onClick Vue.js component. And this onClick component is built in a way that it can take a block. And you see on that example, it's you calling onClick, and then you pass in a block. And with this block contains just the button component. And the first step then will be that Matestack renders the onClick template and then the block within. So in this case, the button component renders that to HTML, ships that to the browser. But the onClick component has a special component tag where we are referencing the Vue.js part of onClick. So it's not going to generate JavaScript during runtime or whatever. So we have a onClick Vue.js component in place, and the onClick Ruby component is just rendering HTML with, in this case, the component tag around it. And when the browser mounting, or when Vue.js is booting on the browser, the onClick JavaScript will recognize this component tag, and then it will be mounted and will be active on the browser. And now it's pure Vue.js, and it's pretty simple. If you have a look at the onClick implementation of the JavaScript implementation of onClick within the core, it's just like a click function. So if anything within this onClick component is clicked, then in this case, an event is emitted, because onClick is configured to emit an event, a string-based event. And this is just a Vue.js event hub in the browser. So it's just, I don't know how to describe it. The Ruby thing is responsible for rendering HTML at the end, and then the JavaScript is starting in the browser, and in this case, just waiting for a click event and then going to emit a button. And the thing is with the event hub, so the events which are emitted, other reactive components, just in this is example there's a toggle component right next to the onClick, which is just waiting for that event and is told to show its block, in this case, because you pass in a block into the toggle component. And it's just going to show the content, in this case, for 5 seconds, because it is configured to hide after 5 seconds again. So it's pretty easy at the end if you're going to have a look at the Vue.js components in the core. So it's no crazy things like JavaScript is generated, or whatever is just Vue.js implementation and some Ruby implementation.
Is Vue.js required to use Matestack, or is it kind of like an option?
It's an option. So as I told you, it's like we have these 3 layers, and the first layer is it's kind of like the first layer is create UI components in pure Ruby. So no reactivity at all. Just create your UI components in pure Ruby and use our components like div, span, button, whatever. So pretty much all HTML tags you can think of are implemented within Matestack. So, but you can use, because you're writing pure Ruby, you can build a pretty clean structure while implementing your kind of static UIs. It's kind of a substitute to Vue component. And I've actually never tried out Vue component myself, but I think that will be pretty much the same, because Vue component has the possibility to define a class and then define the UI implementation within that class. And Trailblazer itself is the same, but Matestack offers you to do that in pure Ruby without any ERB or HTML required, and giving you the opportunity to use all kind of Ruby magic to clean up your Vue UI implementation. And the next step then is the next optional layer of Matestack would be this reactive layer. So using the reactive UI components, like on-click and toggle is the most simplest examples you can think of. What we have way more advanced reactive components, async, for example. Async is also waiting for an event, wherever that event is coming from, and then re-rendering a part of the UI. So that's an advanced, this is like an HTTP GET request in the background during browser runtime. But don't go too much into detail. That we have a lot of reactive core components, but they are optional. So because you can use Matestack if you just want to think like, that's a really cool idea, I'm able to implement my UIs in pure Ruby. So, and then that's it. You don't have to use any reactive features, or you can decide like later on you want to add some reactive features because you don't want to touch JavaScript anymore. And you may have a look at the reactive features of Matestack, and probably they cover what you want to do. And the goal behind Matestack is always like making it as easy as possible for you to implement your UIs, because that was the original aim, making it easy to implement user interfaces. And yeah, kind of have, because like I'm loving Rails, and to get that feeling, implementing a Rails application like with Active Record, Action Controller, and routing. So all these great tools we have, but now we have, like, at least for us, it's for the UI, we have a tool which is as cool as Active Record and sits right next to Active Record models. And yeah, just write pure Ruby to create your web apps at the end.
Nice. So you guys have great docs. So we'll push people there and stop making you describe code, I think, on air. I know it's hard. You did a good job.
Thank you.
So I noticed that first off, this is a big project. Like, your docs are very comprehensive. You know, you've got a like really nice marketing site, and it looks like you are trying to monetize this in a way that I haven't seen a lot of people monetize open source before. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, one thing about the docs, by the way, yeah, the docs are pretty comprehensive, and it's a lot of work to build them. Actually, today I restructured the docs, and because I want to make it as easy as possible to get things going. And yeah, just a little note there. We are a software service agency, so we are providing software services for our clients, and we use Matestack to create projects. So we iterate Matestack based on the experiences we have in our client projects. But at the beginning, I thought, okay, it's only the UI layer, so it should be manageable to build that. And it turns out it's a lot of work. If you want to make it right, if you want to enable people to really use it, then it's a lot of work. And it's hard to do that while earning money on client projects. I think everybody knows that. If anybody has done open source and earned money and in a different way, it's not that easy. We struggled a lot actually with that. And I'm the CEO of that company, and I'm trying to push the company towards a point where at least We generate some revenue from add-ons, something like we're trying out to do. We just set it up, GitHub sponsoring to provide extra value. So a lot of Matestack should be open source, and it's an open source project, and we love to do open source. But we thought, okay, we should try to provide extra value. We are creating a Bootstrap gem, so to use Bootstrap components without the need to implement them yourselves or whatever. And so it's boost your productivity even more. But the deal is that we get some money for that to implement that. And we're trying out to push the company towards generating a little bit of revenue out of extra value on top of the open source project. And of course, the dream would be to being paid for making the Matestack better and better, while providing open source value, so free open source value and additional value for a small subscription fee kind of. And that's the idea behind it, because I love to implement Matestack, but somehow you need to survive as a company, and doing client work and open source at the same time is pretty challenging.
Yeah, I think we all three of us kind of have, or we know that intimately. So I commend you on trying something new, because I don't see a lot of people kind of doing this where they're like, hey, here's the open source kind of quote unquote product, but we have services we can offer. We can have consultancy, we can get extensions, and we can help you even more outside of just this open source thing that we are graciously giving to the world. So I think that's really cool.
Yeah, there's one example that comes to mind that I've always been really impressed by, and that's the Shaka Code Reacted Rails. Like, they offer that gem for free, and then you can pay for like a pro subscription and get support and like server-side rendering, caching with server-side rendering, stuff like that. I always thought that's a cool model. It's kind of like the Sidekick model, right? And
yeah, Sidekick is like actually a good example. I think it's a really sustainable way how he built Sidekick. And yeah, so that would be kind of a dream to build a company like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it works. It's not as common in the Ruby community yet. We use Sidekick at Podia, and we just moved to the Enterprise Edition. It was like a no-brainer for us when we were ready for it, because we've built an entire infrastructure around using Sidekick. So the dev time it would take to build some of the features we want to build to Sidekick, Mike's already done. We just buy a license. It's a good model.
So let's talk about some more stuff. So why, if you're trying to sell this to someone else, why, if I'm starting a new project, and I'm obviously like, I'm in on this, the idea of some people aren't as big on DSLs, like the RSpec haters, like the two people in this call, but I am a lot younger and dumber, and I love it. I love the DSL. I've built my own DSL that's kind of similar, where you have it pure Ruby, where instead of doing, I think, because my helper framework was like tag, I was building helpers that were like card, and then it was like tag.div, and there was these super complex untested helpers, and it became like a spider's nest, but you have a way of nicely organizing, and there's a pattern. So what's kind of like the argument? Why should someone use Matestack?
Well, because especially if you use the reactivity features, you're way faster implementing your user interfaces, and it's way more fun. So it's actually, it's kind of a business value that you're faster, but it's also really an emotional value that you kind of keep your sanity while creating user. At least it's a gem made for backend oriented Ruby developers. I'm not going to try to convince like front-end developers to use Matestack. It's just because I'm a Ruby developer, and I'm kind of backend oriented, and I love to use Ruby as much as possible. So, and because now it's possible to create UIs and even reactive UIs in pure Ruby, I have way more fun doing things. It's not, okay, now I have to handle the UI, and I'm kind of already nervous about it because I hate the complexity involved with that. So yeah, it's somewhere on the website I'm telling it's a native and fun part of a Rails development. And it feels like that for us. And this is great value for us. And we're trying to give that value to as much Ruby developers as possible. And if we're talking to kind of business people, I always kind of emphasize, it's way faster and you save money and whatever. I think it's like that as actually, because using this abstraction of the reactivity saves you, I've done a comparison somewhere. It's really like 50% less code and 50% less complexity and whatever. And if it's a growing application, it's a great value as well. But I think the fun part shouldn't be forgotten.
I firmly agree. I mean, you could have left it at it's fun and I would have been like, sweet, let's do it. What about testing?
Well, the core components, like we have 400 capybara tests. So we're pretty into testing because like we said right up from the beginning, we have to test everything. It's going to be a nightmare if we're not going to test that thing. So the core is, I've never calculated the coverage, the test coverage actually, but it should be covered pretty well. So with the capybara tests with activated JavaScript, so the tests are not that fast actually. I think the test suite needs 8 minutes to pass. But yeah, we're trying to test these reactive features as well. And for you as a user, where our testing guide is actually in progress right now, unfortunately. But we have some RSpec helpers giving you the opportunity to really test your components as fast as possible. So you don't have to write a lot of code. It should be the same experience as creating UIs with Matestack. Should be like testing UIs.
Right.
Matestack. So yeah, but it's the guide towards that is in progress right now.
So right now, would you kind of suggest that users do kind of like a system/feature integration test with Matestack, or is there a way to kind of like unit test it? Or is that kind of what's kind of rolling out? Well,
we're actually only doing these capybara tests. So the idea would be that you create a component and we have helpers, RSpec helpers, that will render that component, and you just expect with the capybara helpers how the output should look like. So this is the kind of testing we would recommend or kind of offer. So yeah, because out of limited resources, we don't do more kinds of testing. So because sometimes it's a black box testing, so it's a high level view on testing, but it's enough right now, at least for us.
Makes sense. Have you thought about adding mini test helpers? I'm just asking as I don't like mini tests. I'm going to say that right now, but these other two do. So I was just wondering if you had plans, or maybe that is something that you could call out for. That would be a nice request for someone who wants to contribute to the project, that kind of adding both.
Yeah, for sure. We're sometimes, tunnel. I don't know if you can say that in English as well. So we have only our workflow, and it's capybara and it's RSpec and whatever. And sometimes we need somebody else to tell us that there should be a different approach, or even help us to implement the approach. Of course, that will be like open source, right? And I would love to see contributions like that. I think we should we should put more effort into building the community around Matestack, enabling people to contribute better. At the moment, it's sometimes, okay, we provide the open source project and that's it. But actually, it's not the way we want it to be. Maybe sometimes because we're trying to monetize parts of Matestack, maybe people think, okay, well, it's not a typical open source thing or whatever, but that would be unfortunate. So we have to put more effort into building a community and to push people or ask people to contribute. And that would be a good example. And the React thing, by the way, as well, because a lot of people are asking, okay, it's React components also, because I've talked about Vue.js, and Vue.js is not the only thing around, right? So React is a big thing, especially I think a lot of Rails people doing React. And well, we have Stimulus Reflex as well coming up. It's a very interesting project. And so I think parts of Matestack can be used in Stimulus, and parts of Stimulus Reflex, and parts of Stimulus Reflex can be used in Matestack. So there should be more of a community and more of a discussion around new features.
Right. Yeah. Well, you were talking and you kind of made me think about Stimulus Reflex, because at the beginning, Stimulus Reflex was kind of very akin to Matestack in the sense that Nate was building it, and I kind of hopped on and started helping him, and then eventually joined him in building the entire company. But we were building it for CodeFund, which is the company we were both working for. and it was open source, and we encouraged other people to use it on their applications. But at the end of the day, we were building it for what we needed it for. And it just so happened that we got lucky and we built a really thriving community around it and encouraged a lot of people to contribute and build applications and write blog posts. And that paid off a lot when CodeFund eventually dissolved. And right now there's a massive community behind Stimulus Reflex who's doing a lot of work. And it's not me anymore, as much as I hate to say it, but I know Nate's still in there, but there's a thriving community that's adding features. Jason and Chris have both added features to it. So even though we were building it for our purposes, there were a lot of people like, hey, I have this other purpose. And we were like, hey, why don't you build it? And just kind of really encouraging people to build it is what I think really started getting more people invested in it, more people using it. And to the point where when CodeFund eventually did dissolve, I had interviews with people who were like, yeah, we're looking for someone who can write Stimulus Reflex. I was like, that's cool. So it kind of reminds me of the same kind of thing when we were early out.
Yeah, so I think we need a kind of a transition here that well, the main contributors are all around our network. So I think we have like around 4 main contributors and a lot of small contributors as well. And we're kind of pushing all the development. But I have to say, like, there's also kind of a lack of knowledge on my side how to build that community. So it's completely surreal actually right now to be here in a call with you guys talking about the open source project. So I'm not too familiar with actually the community side of open source projects, because I started building that thing because I wanted to have it. And I thought, okay, it would be super cool to build a business around it. And of course, it would be super cool to build a community around it. But sometimes I don't know how to do that. I have to improve myself to create that community. And so everybody who's listening to that, I would be super happy to have a lot of people contributing to Matestack and using Matestack and working together, because the longer I work on Matestack, the more I discover like, okay, that's a lot of work. Because I have so many ideas what can be possible with Matestack, but resources are limited.
Well, hopefully being on the podcast will help get some, more people introduced to it, which will grow the community. Do you have like a roadmap of things that you would like to have done, that people can poke around through and see if they can find something to contribute? Because I feel like a lot of times it can be hard to go, if you want to contribute to Rails, what do you do? And it's, unless there's issues that are marked with help wanted or something like that, it can be tough. So I was just curious if you had, any easy entry points for someone who would like to get involved.
Yeah, last year on Hacktoberfest, we had a lot of issues were marked with help wanted, because we have implementing these HTML components was a pretty clear task, and a lot of people helped us out. That's why we have like around 30 core contributors actually, because within that time, people helped us out to build these components. And now we don't have these simple tasks anymore, actually. And it would be now our job to define, at least that would be my opinion, that it would be helpful to have like clearly defined areas of improvement or areas of work where help is wanted. And I think right there, the lack of knowledge how to do this is kicking in. And well, our next step would be, it's actually on our list to have a weekly Q&A call, so that to start to talk to people and try to get a feeling, okay, who's in and what are their resources and what do they want to do, because they need to have fun while doing these things. And I think I need more connection to the people to be able to define these work packages. Yeah, but that's a really good question. Yeah, how to proceed there.
Yeah. Do you guys have like a Discord or a Slack or anything for people to hang out in? Because I know that's like a core piece of the Stimulus Reflex community.
We have a Gitter chat. It's not in use anymore, actually. We had a time where people are asking questions, but within that time, unfortunately, we had problems with our business. So I had to put all my resources into keeping the business going. I have to admit that. And I think we lost kind of the small community we built there, because we were like not doing anything anymore within Matestack and open source. And I'm pretty sad about that. Actually, I'm trying to get these people back. I hope I'm going to be able to maintain more consistently the time I put into open source within the next months, and to try to get in touch with these people. And yesterday I tried out Discord because I'm not too happy with Gitter. And yeah, I think I'm going to go for a Discord server.
Yeah, we found a lot of success with Discord. And I've used Gitter in the past, and I'm not the biggest fan of it because it's like on Discord, like I have Discord running all the time because I'm in multiple Discords. It's kind of just like Slack, but it's way more features and way easier to kind of it's kind of community focused, whereas Slack is kind of like team focused. So Discord was a lot of our success because not only was that something that, like, if I don't remember to like that there is a Gitter, because I'm not like, I don't have Gitter on my computer, I'm just going to forget about it. Whereas Discord, I always have it running, just like Slack. And sometimes I encourage Jared White. Jared came on, it was either this podcast or the Ruby Blend when we had it. And I was like, you guys don't have a Discord, I would highly recommend it. And because of the success we saw with Siemens Reflex, and part of that success is that once there are people in there who are actively using the project, those people will be somewhat incentivized to help other people come in. And so what you start getting, and I've started to see this in Bridgetown as well, is that even though Jared White, who's the core maintainer of Bridgetown, may not be awake or may not be online, someone else may be. So when someone new jumps in, they're like, hey, I have this problem, which is usually the entry point for a lot of these types of servers. There's someone else is like, oh yeah, all you have to do is this. And that's how the community starts to grow, is that people start helping each other, and they don't need you necessarily to sit there and answer every question. And in the beginning, it might just be you or you and your team. But as more people come in and they have a problem, if it's a Discord, they're more likely to stay there. I've noticed the retention is a lot higher because it's just another Discord server that they're on. And you'll get those people coming back, and the people who start using it will get more and more involved, and it'll start kind of snowballing from there if you kind of play your cards right.
Yeah, that would be great. Like, I'm going to try that out for sure. I wanted to set things up this week, actually, but like, again, limited resources next week.
There you go. By the time this episode airs, this should be 2 weeks from now. So hopefully by then there will be something, and I for sure will hop in, and I definitely want to start playing around with this because this is, like I said, this is my dream. This is what I want. This is what I want. This is how I would love to build UI, because I'm just so sick of ERB, Jason and Chris. Cool. Is there anything else that you want people to know about Matestack that we haven't covered here as we're kind of closing in on our time?
Well, the last thing maybe is that we covered like the 2 layers of Matestack, and the third layer, just as a quick teaser, would be to build like whole SPA, single page application like apps with like page transitions. So I want people to understand that we have these 3 layers, and it start with just UI implementation in pure Ruby. And then you can add some reactive components. And if you want to go even further, you can build whole apps in pure Ruby with dynamic page transitions. And so that's how we build applications. So we use full Matestack, of course, but we have this 3-layered system kind of Matestack adoption. So that's maybe the last thing.
I was looking at that on the homepage, and it's interesting because, you might have a templating language, but like you've also got kind of something like view component, but also like almost like an inertia where it takes over the Rails front end and is a view front end with the router and everything. Like effectively you're doing that, but it's all in pure Ruby, which is really cool. So this is a very ambitious project because you have so many things that you're doing. So it's really exciting to see this because there's a lot of these things starting up that are like, what if we reinvent the front end and we don't write as much JavaScript and stuff? And it's really cool to think about, what if you could stay in Ruby land all day long? That is pretty fun.
Yeah.
That brings up a question that always comes to mind on these things. Like when you're debugging stuff, you're writing Ruby code, but the stuff that runs in production is Vue for your events and JavaScript and stuff. Do you have helper things to help debug that when you wrote Ruby, but JavaScript broke?
Well, while developing, you can use the Vue.js development tools within the browser, and that's pretty helpful to debug the events and the state of the components. So of the reactive components or your own components, because you can create your own Vue.js components as well and plug them in. So that will be in development. But if things are breaking in production, because that was question was, right?
Yeah, I mean, just in general, mostly like when you're writing JavaScript and maybe you didn't connect it right or something, and then the JavaScript when it's running breaks or something. But maybe it's designed in a way that doesn't happen very often because you have all of this is being generated before it even renders. So maybe you'll be able to catch bugs that the user made ahead of time before they're trying to fix it in the browser.
Well, that's an interesting question. I have to think about it a little bit, but what comes to my mind would be like that any production JavaScript errors would be covered for something like a Sentry plugin or whatever, that you at least be informed about JavaScript issues on production and you can try to investigate. But yeah, it's if you're using the reactive core components like onClick, toggle, async, form, all these things, they are pretty well tested and you just configure how they work. So of course you can break things, but it's not that likely because it's actually you just configure already existing components. Yeah, maybe that's the thing with the advantage, but of course errors can happen and yeah.
Dude, speaking of errors that can happen, Jason, what is a great way to find these Ruby and JavaScript errors in your application?
Well, you could skim the logs every day and look to see if any errors were thrown line by line. You could, let's see, I guess that's the only way I know of.
You could puts debug.
You could puts debug. You could
run by bug in production.
Yeah.
That's a favorite.
Yeah. You could rescue all exceptions and just never know about errors.
I like that one.
Do you have a better idea, Andrew?
Yeah, my suggestion personally, because I'm not a fan of the puts debugging and, by bug does not belong in production. I'm going to go ahead and say it. Honey Badger. Honey Badger will give you access to those JavaScript errors and those Ruby errors and help you debug your async applications. And it sounds like it would pair great with Matestack, where there could be errors in the JavaScript, there could be errors in Ruby, and they'll get you both. So check out Honey Badger and let them know we sent you. And that's our suggestion.
Can do that.
Love it.
Cool. Jason and Chris, you guys have any more questions?
Nothing on my end. It's been exciting.
As someone spending a lot of time writing React lately, I'm interested to look at this more. Calm down, Andrew.
You have to make Jason implement the React version.
It hit me yesterday that I'm probably going to have to own a lot of this React code. And I was like, what have I done? But I don't know. I'm still really confident in the React we've been doing. I am interested to look at Matestack. So thanks for taking the time to come and tell us more about it.
Thanks for having me, of course.
Where can people find you online if they want to connect or learn more about you and learn more about the project?
Well, the project is on matestack.io and on GitHub, of course, just looking for Matestack UI core, or Matestack would be enough, actually. And I'm on Twitter. I wasn't too active the last years, but I started using Twitter a bit more. So it's just Jonas Jabari. It's going to be on a website as well. My Twitter handle. Love to see people connecting and asking questions and trying to contribute. But as I said, we're going to offer Q&A calls. I think it's going to be a Zoom call or a Hangout session. I don't know actually right now. So being able to face-to-face. And you're very welcome to be on the Q&A as well if you have any questions on Matestack. So
sweet. Jonas, thank you so much for coming and educating us. And hopefully some listeners out there think this is cool. Like, it's not just me. And I know there are other people. So hopefully they'll come out of the woodwork and check out Matestack. And maybe you'll get a few contributors, some more people in the community.
Thanks so much. So have a nice day and see you soon.
Yeah, see you around the web.
Yeah,
Jason,
thanks for
Chris.
being on the show.